Hey, this is Prashant, and we shall now continue with video 2 for privacy, a human right. In this video, we're going to learn about the various roles and responsibilities people have within organizations to ensure that privacy norms are maintained. We'll also have a quick look at what is data ownership and what is information ownership, and perhaps what are who and what are data custodians, etc. In organizations, responsibilities for asset management, including data, has become increasingly divided among several roles. Asset management and data management need to include both accountabilities and responsibilities for protection of assets based on their classification. We briefly touched about classification in our previous video. There are key roles that have been identified in many laws and regulations that dictate certain accountabilities and responsibilities that organizations need to assign. Now, this is especially true of privacy laws that exist around the world, especially in very privacy aware societies like the US, New Zealand, Australia, and Europe. Now, laws for protection of privacy have been enacted worldwide. Regardless of the jurisdiction, privacy laws tend to converge around the principle of allowing the individual to have control over their personal information, including how it is protected while it was being collected, processed, and stored by organizations. For organizations to protect the individual's personal information according to compliance requirements, they must assign accountability and responsibility properly. Compliance requirements will treat personal information as data that requires protection at every step of the data lifecycle. Now, the data lifecycle consists of collection of data, processing of data, storage of data, archiving of data, and finally, most important, the destruction of data. Protection of data requires a clear distinction of roles, accountabilities, and responsibilities to be clearly defined and identified. Let's start with the first role, data subject, the individual who is the subject of personal data. Data owner, accountable for determining the value of the data that they own and therefore also accountable for the protection of the data. Data owners also are accountable for defining policies for access of the data and clearly defining and communicating the responsibilities for such protection to other entities, including stewards, custodians, and processors. We shall define these three shortly. Data controllers. In the absence of a true owner, especially for personal information that has been collected by organizations belonging to clients and customers, the data controller is assigned the accountability for protecting the value of information based on proper implementation of controls. The controller, either alone or jointly with others, determines the purpose for which and the manner in which any personal data is to be processed and therefore protected. Data stewards. Data stewards are commonly responsible for data content, context, and associated business rules within the organization. Data processors. Data processors are the entities that process the data on behalf of the data controller. Therefore, they may be given the responsibility to protect the data, although the accountability will always remain with the controller. Finally, data custodians. Data custodians are responsible for the protection of data while in their custody. Please note, while in their custody. That would mean safe custody, transport, storage, and processing of the data and the underlying compliance to policies in regard to protection of data. Now, this gets us to an important aspect called data ownership. Now, data management and protection involves many aspects of technology. but it also requires involved parties to clearly understand their roles and responsibilities. So data ownership is not just about technology. It's about technology, people, processes, and the entire chain. The objective of delineating data management roles and responsibilities are to clearly defined rules associated with functions, establish data ownership throughout all phases of a project, instill data accountability within an organization or within a process, and ensure that adequate agreed upon data quality and metadata metrics are maintained on a continuous basis. Now, as we've seen, information goes through a life cycle that consists of phases that include creation, use, archiving, and destruction. Information security controls and activities need to be embedded in the life cycle phase to protect it. Protection, as we know, includes not only confidentiality, but also integrity and availability. But security activities should also be involved in the last phase of the life cycle, which is destruction. Defensible destruction is what should happen when the information is no longer needed. Now we come to an important aspect called information ownership or information owner. When information is collected or created, someone in the organization needs to be clearly made accountable for it. We refer to this entity as the owner. Often, this is the individual or group that created, purchased, or acquired the information to allow the organization to achieve its mission and goals. This individual or group is considered and referred to as the information owner. The information owner, therefore, is in the best position to clearly understand the value, either quantitative or qualitative, of the information. The owner is also accountable to protecting the information based on that value. So not only is the owner responsible for protecting the value, but he's also responsible for identifying the value. The owner is also accountable for protecting the information based on that value, and in order to determine the correct value, the owner therefore has the following accountabilities. Determine the impact the information has on the mission of the organization. Understand that replacement cost of the information if it can be replaced. Determine which laws and regulations, including privacy laws, may dictate liabilities and accountabilities related to the information. Determine who in the organization or outside of it has a need for the information and under what circumstances the information should be released. And finally, know when the information is inaccurate or no longer needed and should be destroyed. The organization, as part of good data management, need to be able to identify the owners of the data. Those data owners then need to be made accountable for the protection of the value of that data. Data owners generally may have legal rights over the data, along with copyright and intellectual property rights. Data ownership includes the right to use the data to drive corporate decisions and in situations where the continued maintenance become unnecessary or uneconomical, the right to destroy it. It's also very important for data owners to establish and document certain expectations that need to be passed on to others, such as the custodian, etc., as they relate to data that is owned by the owner. For instance, there may be examples of documentation like the ownership, intellectual property right, and copyright of that data. It could be the obligation relevant to ensure data is compliant with compliance requirements. Say the data on the COVID-19 website, there has to be a data owner for the website that ensures that data that is available on the website is accurate and is what people expect it to be. And the expectation for protection and responsibility delegated to the custodian and other assessors in the data are also to be documented by the owner. Data custodians. Data custodians, as the word implies, have custody of assets that don't belong to them, usually for a certain period of time. Those assets belong to owners somewhere else, but the custodians have the custody of those assets as they may be required for access, decisions, supporting goals and objectives. Custodians have the very important responsibility to protect the information while it's in their custody, according to the expectations by the owners as set out in policies, standards, procedures, baselines, and guidelines. We have discussed these terms in the past. It will be up to the security function to ensure that the custodians are supported and advised and have the proper skills, tools, and architecture, etc., to be able to properly protect assets, such as information, while in their custody. However, these aspects are addressed and managed should be in and these management should be in accordance with the defined data policies applicable to the data, as well as other applicable data stewardship applications. Now, typical responsibilities of a data custodians are adhere to appropriate and relevant data policies, standards, procedures, baselines, and guidelines as set out by owners and supported by the security function, ensuring accessibility to appropriate users and maintaining appropriate levels of data security. Fundamental data maintenance, including but not limited to data storage and archiving. Data documentation, which we referred in the previous slide, including updates to documentation, is again a responsibility of the data custodian. Finally, the assurance of quality and validation of any addition to data, including supporting periodic audits to assure ongoing data integrity. While on this topic of privacy, it's important for us to understand the common privacy law tenets. Now, many privacy laws address similar concepts associated with individual personal data that have become common globally. Uh, I think it's important for all of us to be aware and to be familiar with these general concepts. The concepts are notification. Now, the data subjects, that's the individual human related to personal data in question, should be notified before any of their personal data is collected or created about him or her. Participation. The subject should have option not to take part in the transaction if the subject chooses not to share their personal data. Scope. Any personal data collected or created should be for a specific purpose. This purpose should be legal and ethical and be included in the notification aspect of the transaction, as well as inform the limitation aspect. Limitation. Any personal data should be used for the purpose identified in the scope aspect of the transaction. Any additional use would require repeating the notification and the participation aspect. Accuracy. Any personal data should be factual and current. Data subjects should have a means to correct or edit any information about the subject in a simple as well as a timely manner. Retention. Personal data should not be kept any longer than is necessary for the purpose or as required by the applicable law. Security. Any entity that has possession of personal data is responsible for protecting it. Dissemination. Any entity that has possession of personal data should not share it with any other entity, nor release it without the express permission of the data subject and in accordance with applicable laws. Now, these common privacy law tenets are essential for us to understand because we are living in privacy aware societies. So in this video, we saw what were the roles and responsibilities of people within organizations and how they could be discharged effectively for an organization to maintain the basic tenets of privacy. We also looked at the 8 fundamental privates of Tennessee, and we also saw that people would need to protect data that they either own or they have custody of. Now, we should also understand that there are various types of data from the privacy point of view, And we will, and the slide here just tells you about it. The first type that we classified as PII, that is personally identifiable information. These are data nuggets or data pieces that are used or are intended to be used to identify an individual. Now, from privacy perspective, this is very, very important. And then there are device identifiable information, or DII. That is any data that is linked to a particular browser or device if that data is not used to identify a person. Now you will like to know a lot about this when you look at the next phase called forensics. And then there is a third classification of data called the de-identified data. That's DID. Data that is not linked or intended to be linked to an individual, device, or browser. Now we've seen what the basic tenets of privacy are, what privacy means for us, what we can do with if we ever happen to get one of the responsibilities as mentioned in the data life cycle. We also mentioned the data life cycle, which is creation, processing, and finally deletion. We shall now stop and go into an exercise. The details of that will be available to you on Zoom. Thank you.